but our last speaker on the topic of love is my friend from Calgary, Canada, the host of no fewer than three big book studies a week on Zoom. I give you Paige, the one and only Paige.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much, Howard. I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic, and I so appreciate it. And I love that it's like, wow, this person's got this background and this history, and it's like, Paige, an unmanageable amount of service. She just can't say no. So we're going to illuminate my defects as we roll on in. And what a privilege it is to speak on the topic of love. You know, I'm an alcoholic, I'm no historian, but I go on these little rabbit holes and I get excited about Alcoholics Anonymous, because how could you not? You know, when this thing has happened, how could you not get excited? And, you know, Dr. Bob had this book and he would read it regularly. He would recommend it to newcomers. And it's called The Greatest Thing in the World by Henry Drummond. And the topic of that book is that love is the summum bonum, the greatest thing. And it's a treatise on the first, I think it's 1 Corinthians or something, you can tell, not a historian. But so when I get to talk on love, I'm like, I'm talking about the greatest thing. Like, yeah, like rock and roll. That's what we're talking about. And for me, it truly, and like, it actually, so greatest thing in the world, it is not Oxford Group. At best, it's slightly Oxford Group adjacent, you know what I'm saying? But in it, he talks about if I have love, and we're not talking about that codependent love. Listen, I'm going to talk about my love. I'm sure nobody relates to this type of love. But you know, the blue of his grippy socks matches the blue of his eyes. And you know it's meant to be. You know what I'm saying? Oh, would you look at the brown in my coffee? It matches the brown of his beautiful skin. It's meant to be. You know, the fond in love on AA campus, right? And so that's not the type of love that we're talking about. We're talking about a love that is known as agape. We're talking about a love that is deeper than a human love, a transformational love, a transformational power. That's the love that is available on offer. And, you know, I come to AA and I'm riddled with self, I'm riddled with alcoholism, don't even know what that is. But what I come to find out is that that is what I need. I need that transformational experience in the love of a power beyond myself. And as what's already said, how do we learn? We learn through stories. And so what is a bit of this story told with inaccuracies, because that's how I do. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I'll point out where I'm making things up, or I'm embellishing. But the story of Frank Buchman and his experience. And Frank Buchman, he created or helped to develop this home for boys. It was known as the Lutheran Hospice. And it was this boys' home, and there were like 300 wayward boys that were being helped in this little place in Philadelphia, and they were getting well, and they were beginning to recover, not necessarily from alcoholism, but from pain. And there was something that was happening, and he was being of help and use and service, but he wasn't getting funding by the board of directors. And he wasn't going to be able to do the help that he needed to do. And like any spiritual giant, he did the only logical thing, which is he flipped the tables, flipped them off, knocked the tables off and said, go F yourself, I quit. And so that's where I embellished. He did quit, and he did quit resentfully, but he didn't throw anything. Nothing like that happened. And his doctor was like, dude, you're a little stressed. That's verbatim. His doctor definitely said, dude. And he's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take that advice. I need to chill out. I'm gonna head over to Europe. And he goes on this month-long vacation to Europe. And and this is something I talk about a lot. A spiritual awakening so rarely begins with me getting what I want, and instead getting what I needed. And there was a lecture, an evangelical preacher that he wanted to hear, and he's like, I'm going to listen to that guy. That guy wasn't speaking. So he listens to this female preacher by the name of Jessie Penn Lewis, and how she speaks grips him. And if any of you are married and any wives that have husbands right now, like, ooh, spiritual awakening began with listening to a woman, just write that down and then unsolicitedly give that to your husband. I'm kidding. I'm gonna start some resentments is what I'm doing right now. But he heard her, and he heard her at depth. and he was moved, and he began to have a conversion, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. And how did that happen? And isn't it always how it happens for at least a silly little drunk like me? He came to the conclusion that maybe he was wrong. He could see that those 6 other guys were maybe not doing the right thing, but when he showed up with resentment and hatred in his heart, he joined them as number 7. And thus began his spiritual awakening, and thus began the Oxford Group and the Oxford movement, and which, as we've so eloquently and wonderfully heard, has grown and continued on into today. And that's what I mean when I talk about love, because it is a love that can penetrate somebody like me, my resentment, my hatred, the bondage of self, my old ideas, the way I think things need to be. You know what I'm saying? To penetrate all of that and to crack me open. And you see, what I need is nothing less than that. And in the greatest thing in the world, which again, Oxford Group adjacent, it's not even Oxford Group. But it talks about if I have that love of God, every other spiritual characteristic just flows. You know what I mean? When I am touched and changed in a profound way, how could I not be honest? How could I not be unselfish? One of the most sure signs of a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, is the desire to go and help somebody else. How could I not have a purity, not the purity of maybe my internet browser, but the purity of my motives and the purity of my desire to give and let go of the results? How could I not be changed? But for somebody like me, I need a little course of action to get me there. You know, in my world in 2024, it's the 12 steps. And that's what was said. It so makes sense that the result of the 12 steps is honesty, unselfishness, love, and purity. It makes sense that that is what an awakened spirit would yearn, would grow towards, would seek. And yes, it makes sense to this silly little drunk, that idea that, man, those are ideals, knowing that I likely will not ever hit them perfectly. Now, we talk about how in Alcoholics Anonymous, we sort of, distance ourselves a little from the absolutes because, I'm sure I'm the only silly little drunk with black and white thinking, and that, well, I can't get it perfect, so why bother? I'm sure no one else has ever related to that. But here's the thing. It talks about spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And I got this defect. It's a little pedantic. And some of the historians here are like, girl, you don't pedant. You got this whole thing wrong. That's cool. But where I can be a little pedantic is right there. There's a lot of things that I don't argue on any hill. I've ceased fighting. But one of the places where I'm like, I am pedantic is that idea that it is spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, as opposed to progress, not perfection. And the reason why I'm so adamant about that distinction is how many times do I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, or even before coming to AA, I just get sober and things start coming into my life. I start getting, the family back, the relationship back, matching grippy socks, you know what I mean? I start getting these things back in my life. But they, as an alcoholic, can't keep me sober. The love of family, the love that I have for children, the love that my mother has for me, all the best job, the best, the best of the best of the best cannot keep a drunk like me sober. And it might look like I'm progressing in all these areas of my life, but what truly matters is, how am I progressing spiritually? How am I progressing spiritually? That's what matters for a silly little drunk like me. Because if I can focus on that, my spiritual progress, isn't it wild how everything sorts itself out. Now, I don't have the expensive book that everyone else has. I got a cheaper one. It was $10. I got When Man Listens. It's by Cecil Rose, and he was an Oxford group member. And if you're just kind of listening to us talk about these absolutes and what does that look like in my life, I just wanted to tie some things in. And it says it was very necessary to keep that word absolute in mind. It is like a clear white light searching into all sorts of hidden corners. How beautiful does that not tie into our fifth step promises, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. It makes sure that I shall not overlook the places where I was content with second best or excuse myself for a compromise. Honesty. So let's look at honesty. It says, well, that's not too bad. I don't rob the till or make fraudulent returns to the inspector of taxes. And then it goes, or do I? But absolute honesty, that looks different. Do I make elaborate excuses over something I simply have forgotten to do? Do I waste my employer's time by laziness or slackness? Am I living in open with my family? Absolute purity. What would my thought life look on the screen? That's what it says. Oh, got private browsing on that one? You know what I'm saying? Absolute unselfishness. Why do I get touchy and defensive when people criticize me? Am I only thinking of them? Or is it my feelings and reputation for which I still care? And what would my family say about my absolute unselfishness? Absolute love. Yes, I know that I did not begin the trouble, and as far as I know, I have not done anything to keep it going. But what have I done to end it? He's talking about fights, arguments, resentments, disagreements that I'm not even at fault for. What have I done to end it? And what about my likes and dislikes, sitting in that chair of judgment? And so that is this beautiful description of how I can begin to have a look at those absolutes. And for me, that absolute love is nothing less than that conversion that is spoken about in the 5 C's. And if I've been touched by a presence and a power beyond myself, how could I not go on with the countenance, to wanting to share it with others? And you know, there's 2 stories, and I'll try to talk about them quickly. And if I don't get to the second, that's okay. But I'm reminded of the unconditional nature of God's love when I sit down and work with others. And when I sit down with a sponsee and I receive from them their 5th step. And they share with me the depth of their shame. They share with me that secret they want to kill themselves behind. That thing that they think makes them so desperately unworthy. And they share that with a silly little drunk like me. And how I feel about them changes. I love them more. I love them more. I'm a fall-down failure of a drunk. I'm pissing my pants behind a dumpster on my own willpower. And I love them more. You see, I'm not doing better than God in the love department. And that is the deep and profound love that is on offer. Page 25 talks about the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. What I'm trying to do with these 12 steps is get as much of me, and I don't mean the fun, quirky, silly little me. I mean the selfish, self-centered, wrapped up in the bondage of self, me out of the way so that power can flow through me. I had a sponsee that was struggling. She was a little off the beam, as we all get off the beam. And, you know, when we get into our heads about this thing, we stop doing it, and I get into my head about it. And she was like, why is it always God's love, Paige? She's like saying that to me. And I'm like, you're saying that to me. You know what I mean? But why is it always God's love? Why can't it be my love? And I was like, well, it's pretty easy to love your family. It's pretty easy to love your niece and your nephew. She says, yeah. I'm like, what about that person at the meeting you can't stand? And she's like, oh. And really quickly, I'm going to end with this story. It was shortly the 10-year anniversary of after I got sick. And I'm a person with a disability, and I struggled with a tremendous, and still at times do, amount of shame about my disability and who I am. You know, as a person that can't show up to life in a certain way. And I had somebody in my life tell me about what a failure he thought I was. And I was wrapped up in my self-pity, wrapped up in the bondage of self, and it was on me and I couldn't get free. Now, this is the story I'm going to end on, and I apologize for this, but it was one day I went into the washroom and I was just getting some water. I was just washing my hand. And I saw the light moving out of the toilet bowl, you know, when the light refracts. And I look in and I see an ant, and it's just struggling for life. I have no idea how it got there. And what I did, I made a little toilet paper bridge. I wasn't brave enough to go hand in and get it out, but I made a little toilet paper bridge. And I want you to know, for that moment, that was the best I ever felt about myself. That unconditional love, giving to something that can give nothing in return. You know what I mean? That's the love that's on offer. Thank you for the ability to share.